And our next speaker is Brooke Kuhlmann. I hope I did get that right. Brooke Kuhlmann. He's going to be talking to us on code reviews. Code reviews. Yeah, that's super cool. So Brooke Kuhlmann has like more than 2 decades experience in software engineering. So I'm pretty sure we have a lot to learn from him. And yeah, over to you, Brooke Kuhlmann.
Thank you. Yes, and you got my name right, so thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to. I'm just getting my video and audio here. So is it okay if I share my screen and have video, or should I turn video off? How would everyone prefer that? I want to make sure that the connection and the sound and the audio sounds good for everyone.
Brooke, I think you can just do both.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my entire screen. And just let me know if everyone can see this. I won't be able to actually see chat very well while I'm presenting. I apologize, but I can definitely answer questions afterwards. But I just want to check, does this look good to everyone? Can they see the screen okay? Hear me just fine? Does everything look okay?
Yes, everything looks fine.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I'm super excited to be here. It's a wonderful privilege to be able to speak to you all. So, and today I want to talk about code reviews and how we can actually use code reviews to level up our team, build that kind of bonding, collaboration, and camaraderie as a team, and how to make that possible, especially if you've never kind of done this before or had like a smooth flow in your team. I kind of want to take you through and show you how to do that. So with code reviews, one of the things I want to kind of step back is, if you've ever read the book Peopleware, it's a really great read on basically an analysis of multiple teams and trying to figure out the various patterns that made those teams really awesome. And that really comes about, one aspect of doing that is through code reviews, being able to actually have that communication and camaraderie, which then leads to a team that is really gelled. And a really gelled team is a team that is highly functional, getting things done quickly, and keeps building up those bonds of trust and collaboration and communication amongst the team. So where that kind of ends up going is building that trust. Now, trust is pretty interesting on a team. And again, a highly gelled team, a highly cohesive team has a lot of trust. And that trust takes a while to build up. And the funny thing about trust is once it's very easy to lose. It's very easy to break if people don't have the integrity and good communication and camaraderie to keep building that up over and over and over. After a while of just through communication on the team, that trust can be broken. So it does take a little bit of maintenance. And what I want to talk to you today then is kind of showing you how you can build that through good communication practices. So the ideas behind building trust is really having respect for other people's ideas, the work that they're doing when they're putting up a code review and trying to get that reviewed by the rest of the team. And also knowing where they're coming from, right? Have compassion for them, give them good feedback, try to help them as much as possible, but also be able to actually have a chance to learn from your fellow engineers. Code reviews are not just about just getting work done and pushing things through, right, to get it out into production. Code reviews are also about learning from your fellow team members, right, and having them level you up so that you become a better engineer. So how does that look? So with insensitive feedback, and maybe some of you have felt this, right? You put up, you've been working on a code review, you get the PR up, you're super excited to get the reviews from the team, and then somebody comes along and says all these things to you. And the worst one, of course, is no. That really hurts because there's really, I mean, it's just like, no. Well, what do you mean by no, right? Like, what do you mean this can't possibly work? Or that you might as well do this over. Like that feels pretty harsh and really kind of degrading, actually. So what you want to do then is kind of frame it in a way where you have considerate feedback. And these are examples of considerate feedback where, notice on the previous screen, right, there were kind of like straight out statements, and they were pretty negative in connotation. But these statements, you can see that they actually phrase things as a question. And the important part of this is always trying to ask a question or try to probe a little bit deeper as to what the author is doing with the code that they have up that you're reviewing as a reviewer. And this is really important because this creates a safe space to have that dialogue. It's a nice way to kind of inspect and learn a little bit more about what's going on, and also give thanks to the review or to the author as well, because it's really important to also create a space that is fun to collaborate and work and share code together. So there's a couple of categories when doing feedback in code reviews. There's a non-blocking side and there's a blocking side. On the blocking side, any of the feedback that requires immediate attention really does need to be addressed, right? It's something that the reviewer caught that the author should actually address and get folded in. The other thing too is it really must be fixed, right? Anything that's brought up as blocking really needs to be addressed by the author. And I'll get into more details of what this looks like as we kind of continue in these slides. Now, on the non-blocking side, right, they're really meant to be informative, right? So you can have comments on a PR, but they're really just asking things or maybe suggesting new ways of doing things, but it's not a blocking situation, right? So the author, it's really up to the author's discretion whether they want to actually address that feedback or not. The other thing is that the changes are definitely encouraged on a non-blocking feedback, but again, author's discretion. Author doesn't necessarily have to do it if they don't want to. It definitely is encouraged. It definitely builds up those bonds of trust and camaraderie in the team. But in some cases, the author might be pressed for time or is just trying to get some code out a little quicker, and they can come back to that like in a follow-up code review or a PR. And don't forget, in non-blocking feedback, and I'll point this out more as we get deeper into these slides, the discussion can totally continue, right? Even though a code review might be approved by the team, there might be some lingering discussion, and that's totally fine, right? The code's getting out, the code's getting pushed into production, but the discussion around it can still continue. So what does that look like in terms of feedback format, right? Well, it's kind of simple. You just need an emoticon and a message. And here's an example. Here's an example where I'm using kind of this artist palette here with meant to be like a style emoticon. And again, I'll kind of get into this into deeper details of what that looks like. And then you see a message here, right? Basically saying, hey, it's a stylistic type thing in Ruby. Maybe you want to use object then in this case, right? Instead of setting up a local variable, because that leads to more succinct code and actually does the same thing that the author's trying to do. Granted, the implementation is not wrong. It's just that there might be a shorter way to do it. So this is a stylistic type comment. So what do those emoticons look like that I've been talking about? Well, there's actually 11 of them that I like to use, and you can totally customize for your team and kind of make it your own as you like. But these are the ones I've kind of settled on over the years. Sometimes they change, sometimes they kind of mutate as I find better ways to do things and share with the team or learn from other teams. But these are the kinds of emoticons that I really like to use. And so I want to break these down for you on how you can add them to your team and actually make a really nice discussion when you're doing code reviews. So if you actually split these, on the top, we really have more of the kind of greens and white colors. Those are the informational type emoticons. And then on the bottom is the more concerning, actionable emoticons. You notice that those are red in color and yellow. That is to basically give a visual indication to the author that, hey, there's something that really needs to be taken care of here. So it's a nice way for the author to address that really fast and then get back to the sort of more informational, non-blocking type comments. So you can kind of group these down by color codes, really. For the most part, this color coding works pretty good, but there's some caveats here, and I'll point them out. So in the blues and whites, right, we can kind of stay with the informational kind of questioning type emoticons and feedback. In the yellows, it's more kind of the warning or concerning type emoticons. Granted, it is good if the author can address those concerns, but because they're concerns, right, they're not necessarily blocking on the PR. So again, author's discretion. These are the red emoticons, right? And with the reds, those are really meant to signify and really stand out in the code review that like, hey, something really needs to be fixed here. So for the author, those are the things that they want to address immediately so that they can actually get that code review approved by the team and then rebased onto the main branch. And then lastly, there's the green emoticons. Now, these are the kind of caveats, right? Because they're not all green, especially the mushroom is a little red. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go into the details of those. So if we kind of walk through these, the informational emoticon is the one that you start a message with. And again, it's not blocking. It's really meant for status type updates. And actually, generally, they're just informational. Like I said, you don't actually have to respond to them if you don't want to. It's just a nice way to communicate to the team. So here's some examples of how you might use the informational emoticon, where in this case, right, I'm pretending to be the author in this case, but you could also be the reviewer, leaving some informational emoticon and messages as well. In this case, these are just examples of the author telling the team that, hey, maybe I addressed some feedback. I'm just going to rebase main branch. Once it's green, I'll go ahead and put this onto, push this out to the main branch so it can be deployed. It's just a nice way to communicate to the team that like, hey, I've addressed the feedback. I'm rebasing. I'm handling merge commits or conflicts, sorry, from upstream. Just letting the team know I'm just doing some maintenance on this code review. The next one up is the thought balloon. That one is where you want to use something just as a chance to ask questions, to learn more. Again, these are not meant to be blocking. The PR could be approved. You could still be asking questions. Totally fine. This is just a nice way to learn and level up as a team and really have those deeper discussions. So examples of this is, hey, maybe you leave a comment and you're like, hey, author, did you actually know the rule of 3 here? Like I've seen this pattern happen 3 times. Maybe it's time to actually dry this up and put this into a different object. Or in the second case, right, maybe the command pattern is the right thing to use, right? Maybe this object needs to be a command pattern and we can just call it. And that's a nice way to suggest some seeds, some ideas, a way to make the code better. Now, granted, these are just ideas and just thoughts, discussions. It's not blocking, so it's up to the author if they want to pursue it, or they can follow up with another PR, and that's totally fine too. So with tips, that actually uses the bulb, and it's just a light bulb, kind of like an idea, right? Like a cool thought to share with the team. Again, these are non-blocking as well, but we're starting to get into the yellow area, right? Sort of cautionary area. And these are meant, it's really up to the author to be blocking or non-blocking. But they're really meant as a chance to educate the author. So when you're leaving a review, you might want to leave some tips for the author. So in this case, right, maybe you want to suggest to the author, hey, by the way, maybe pattern matching in Ruby 3.0 is a good use instead of using these case statements here. Or in the second case, right, maybe a whole value object is the right thing to do because it'll be immutable. There's no way to mutate it. It might be a way to encapsulate the data that we're working on in our code and put that into an object that is usable. Again, not necessarily non-blocking, but if the author has time, they might actually want to take this tip and be like, whoa, that's pretty cool. Let me actually fold that in and then have you come back and re-review it. So moving on, in this category of these sort of yellow emoticons, kind of in the warning category, there's also the stylistic one, which I kind of showed you in the very beginning. These, again, are meant to be blocking or non-blocking. It's up to the author. But they're really suggestive of improvements to the style of the code that's being written. So in this case, maybe in Ruby, right, somebody is using double quotes and they're escaping their quotes all over the place. Well, you can suggest to them that, like, hey, in a way to clean this up, right, you might want to actually use % parentheses, and then you wouldn't have to double escape or escape your quotes in your strings. Or you might want to use a dependency injection, right? Maybe you have a lot of constants defined in your object, and you really just want to inject those. So that's a stylistic type choice that might be nice to fix. Again, up to the author if they have time, but as the author receiving this feedback from the reviewer, it actually is kind of nice for you to try to fold that in if you can, because it is definitely a concern that the reviewer is bringing up. So again, stylistic type stuff is usually those don't have to happen too often, because if you have like Rubocop and other kind of like linters, you can kind of let those show up as checks within your code review, so the team doesn't actually have to do that. But every now and then there might be some stylistic type comments that you want to leave as a reviewer. So that's where this emoticon comes into play quite nicely. Lastly, in the warning category is actually the warning itself. So it's meant to be blocking or non-blocking, but it's really meant to alert the author of something that they should be aware of. It might not necessarily block the work that they're doing, but you definitely want to point it out to them because it might be of help to them. So here's some examples of what that might look like. When you kind of leave these kind of messages, right, you can say, hey, by the way, did you know that Jill is actually moving some objects around, right? You might actually either want to wait for her, or depending who beats who, like if you're in first, then maybe she'll have to update, and maybe you want to put a warning on her PR. In the last case, right, again, another team member, Jake in this case, he might be rebasing to resolve some upstream merge conflicts. But that actually might have some effects on the work that you're doing. So this is a case to kind of leave a nice warning to the author so that they have a little bit of a heads up as they're trying to get their code approved and finally put onto the main branch. Okay, so we've talked about warnings, but let's move into the red territory. These are the blocking type emoticons that really need to address some kind of deficiency in the code that's being reviewed. So with the name badge, what's nice about this one is it's pretty straightforward and it's really easy to fix because it's correcting a typo or a misspelling. So here's some examples of where you would use this kind of message to the author. You'd say like, hey, I think you might have misspelled implemented. Maybe you meant to actually say it this way. Same thing with capital, right? These are examples of typos that are really easy to fix and really non-trivial for the author. Oh, sorry, there was some feedback there in the audio. Somebody might need to mute okay, good. It sounds like the feedback got corrected. Thank you. So one of the things that's nice about this is it's really easy for the author to rebase these changes into their code review, into their PR, and then the error is fixed and corrected. It could be in the code itself, it could be in the documentation that's up for review, it could be even in the commit message, right? And those can be easily rebased and fixed and pushed up, and then the team can re-review. Everything's good. The next one that's in the red category is the X, and it's just meant to remove code that can be deleted. So here's some examples of where there might be some code that needs to be deleted. Like, for instance, you came across a spec as a reviewer, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, dear author, you actually have a duplicated line here on line 12. You can go ahead and cut that because it's not doing anything. It's total duplication. In the other case, right, there might be an object that the author wasn't aware of that showed up in the code review as part of the work that they were doing. Maybe they're doing some refactoring or touching a piece of code that they thought needed to be updated. But it turns out that that code is actually dead code. It actually doesn't need to be there. And so it's actually okay to mark that as something that could be deleted entirely. Again, these, just like the name badges, emoticons, they're really easy to fix because it doesn't take much for the author to just remove that code, rebase, and push that up. Totally easy to fix. So in the last one of these kind of red category, the blocking type feedback is the stop sign. Those are actually pretty significant. So when those come along, it's usually a deep concern that the reviewer has, something to point out to the author that maybe they're going slightly in the wrong direction. Maybe what they've architected here is not quite what the team wants. And so being able to talk about that and actually give examples on how to improve it is really critical. So in this case, right, I've given some examples here of where maybe you need to inject the constants, right, instead of embedding them in your object. Maybe that would make the object a little bit more flexible. Or in the second case, the more complex type situation is maybe somebody put some code up for review, but the object is kind of like a God object, right? It's really large, it's doing a ton of things, it's got a ton of responsibilities. And so you as the author, sorry, the reviewer, you're coming along and you're saying, hey, could you actually break this down into smaller objects, right? Because this will be easier to test, this will be easier to maintain, and it'll be more flexible for us as a team to architect this code. Now, granted, I'm not showing you any examples of code here. I'm just trying to stay at the abstract level of talking about how to give good feedback to the author. But the one thing I want to point out with these architectural type feedbacks is, even though I'm showing the emoticon and the sentence structure, right? And I'm asking questions and I'm trying to help the author point out deficiencies in the code. What I would usually follow up with these is I would also point a code snippet, maybe point to some documentation, maybe point to some links to patterns, anything that I can help the author level up really quickly to understand what I'm trying to tell them so that they can actually fix it and get that folded in and then get the review through quicker. So these are usually the heaviest of types of feedbacks, but they are really important because it might be something that could hurt the team downstream. So it's good to call those out and have that discussion. Okay, so we're out of the blockers, right? And now we're kind of wrapping up into sort of the kind of the fun, the positive type emoticons. The first one is the mushroom. It's red. I actually wish there was an emoticon that actually wasn't red. It was like a green mushroom, like anybody that might be video game players that used to play Super Mario back in the day, or still, you'd have like a power-up, a green power-up, right? Unfortunately, the emoticon for that is just red in nature. It's just a standard red mushroom. But the idea is to give a little bit of a bonus to the author and say, hey, maybe you did a great job on the code review. Everything looks great. You approved it. But as you're approving the code review, you might put these bonus examples or feedback in there for the author. And the reason is you want to give them a chance to like maybe level up. Maybe they could push the ticket, go the extra mile, and do something a little additional that's not quite within the realm and scope of the PR, but it might be easy for them to do and tackle as part of that PR. Or it might be something that they want to follow up with based on the discussion of the current PR and open a subsequent PR where they can actually add additional things or fix additional things. So in this case, these are really nice to kind of go that extra mile and do some additional cleanup. And the examples here that are being used is like, maybe there's some namespace cleanup. And so based on the discussion and the work that we had in this PR, maybe we could actually clean up the namespace as well, right? Move some objects around, group them, organize them a little bit better. And this is a great way to kind of do that. Maybe it's part of this PR, or again, up to the author, maybe they follow up with a different PR. And the last one there is maybe there's some duplication going on. Like it's just starting to show up. It's not a problem or a concern in this case, but it might be kind of cool to actually go ahead and start trying to clean that up, maybe part of this work or as a follow-on PR. So these are nice emoticons emoticons and messages to leave to the author. This one, favorite, is really straightforward. It's meant to be super positive, and it's always really to highlight and sort of high-five your teammates and say, hey, great job, really love what you did here, and just give some feedback to the author. The one thing I do want to mention, though, is these need to be authentic, right? You really need to kind of come from the heart on these and make sure that you're giving good feedback, but positive feedback that is authentic. So here's some examples of where this kind of comes into play, right? Like maybe you're wrapping up the review, or maybe you're in the middle of the review, but you're like just highlighting like, hey, really excellent work here, author. The rebasing looks great. I really like the object structure that you did. I really like the solution that you came up with. And then also, maybe just thanking them for all the feedback. Like maybe you had additional feedback in the beginning, and through the course of the review, the author corrected everything, folded all that in, rebased everything so it's really nice and clean. And so now you just want to say thanks. Great job. Really like what you did. So these are always fun to give. And then finally, the last emoticon is really the kind of the bow emoticon, right? To kind of give honor and feedback to those either usually reviewing the PR, and in some cases, the reviewer actually thanking the author. In these examples, what I'm going to show right here is these are kind of simple, but they mean a lot, right? It's not a lot to type. There's not a lot to say here, but it actually goes a long ways in kind of communicating compassion and thankfulness and just camaraderie, to your team. Because, the reviewer took the time to actually review your code, give you good feedback, and level you up as an author, and make your code better as a result. It's kind of nice to acknowledge that when you're done and just tell the author, hey, thanks. It's really great that you were able to catch these things. So I'm just thanking you in return for the review, because that was super powerful. So there's some examples of how you would kind of use those emoticons. So now that we've kind of gone through the emoticons and we talked about how to give feedback, there's a couple things I want to point out in terms of resolving feedback. One is try to address it as fast as possible, right? You don't want to leave the author in the lurch waiting for feedback, because that's painful. And they might be trying to do other things or juggle other types of work, interrupts, messages, you name it. So try to be as fast as possible. The other thing too, as an author, try to split your stories and the code reviews that you're pushing up for review as small as possible, so that it's really fast for the reviewer to actually chew through it, give you feedback, and then move on. So there's also a cadence to this that I want to point out, which is in terms of the speed, like I said on the first slide, you also want to try to at least have a minimum of checking code reviews first thing in the morning when you start, maybe around lunch as you're going to lunch or leaving lunch, or maybe both before you go to lunch and after lunch. And then as you're ending the day, you're starting to head out for the day, but you want to make sure that you've given code review back to fellow team members so that they're not blocked. Now, in reality, right, this is the minimum, but you're going to be working on code yourself. You're going to be pushing things up for review. And while you're kind of waiting for Circle CI to finish, or whatever CI system that you're using, you might just want to bounce over and see if there's any code review that you can address, right, to help a fellow team member out while you're trying to get yours up for review. So this is kind of a general cadence to kind of remember to keep. There's some additional guidelines too that I want to talk about in addition to this cadence, which is try to keep your lines of code that you have up for code review to about 300 lines. The reason that's important is it's really nice to have small code reviews and give the reviewer time to actually dig into them, understand what the author's doing, and really think through to give good quality feedback. If it's 300 lines or more, what happens is they tend to be really hard to review. They take a long time. It takes a lot of stress on the reviewer to actually sit down, look through the code, review it. Maybe they actually have to check out the feature branch themselves and run through it. So try to keep it at a minimum. Now, I say this with a caveat too, because sometimes you can have 1,000 or 2,000 lines of codes of change, but that might be because they're really simple. Like maybe it's deleting a whole bunch of code, or maybe it's just a big refactoring. But all that's happening in the refactoring is that objects are being moved around, but it's the same pattern, right? It's not really changing the behavior of the code. It's not breaking anything. So those are actually, it's a lot of lines of code, but they're actually pretty simple to review because it's really just the same pattern being repeated over and over and over again. So keep that with a grain of salt. But for the big kind of like new content, new implementations, you want to keep those as tight as possible, right? So the reviewer can actually give you good feedback. And then the length of time is, again, try to keep it under a day, right? Don't let somebody who's got a code review up for review go more than one day, because again, that's a kind of a drain on them. It might be blocking some of the work that they're doing, and you want to help them try to get their work out as fast as possible. So let's kind of recap here on what we kind of discussed here in code reviews, which is definitely use emoticons if you can, right? It really changes the dialogue. It really adds a bit of color to the feedback. And it also gives the ability for the eye to visually track in the code review of what's important, like the reds, what's kind of concerning in the yellow category, and what's kind of just ancillary, kind of like just a general discussion, just general curiosity. And that's kind of in that whites and blues kind of range of color coding of emoticons. The other thing too is, like I said at the beginning, right? Always be considerate of people's work, the ideas, the time that they put into it. Make sure that you give them really good feedback, right? So that they level up and become a better engineer because of it. Yeah, sorry, just to reiterate, that constructive feedback is really important. And again, in all these examples, I talked about sentence structure, using questions, framing things as a question. But don't forget to actually put code samples or links to documentation or other things that can really help the reviewer level up. Especially with GitHub, for example, right? The ability to actually put GIFs or videos or even capture a screencast is super valuable as well. So don't forget about leveraging those tools if you can. And then remember, at the end of the day, right, we're all working to get something done, right? We're trying to help our customers. We're trying to deliver really good software. But don't also forget that we're a team, and we're also trying to level each other up so that we can become better, faster, more in a better version of ourselves as engineers, and keep growing as a team. So don't forget to learn and have fun and really just enjoy working with your teammates. So that is code reviews in a nutshell. Again, thanks so much. I'll have these slides up for anyone that needs them. I can post in the chat here. Happy to field questions if anybody would like to answer, or if I can answer any questions. But again, thanks so much, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.